It's a real pleasure now for me to introduce Anjali Sastry. And in Anjali's case, unlike some folks where I have to do a little bit of homework, I'm really pleased to introduce her because we interact on a fairly regular basis in my day job, and I think you're going to be really inspired by some of the things she's got to share. Sustainability has become a very, very large theme, not only here at MIT, obviously in the world, and it's probably getting toward the notion of buzzword if it isn't already. But one thing that's pretty cool about it here at MIT is people really do live it in a lot of different ways. And Anjali's going to touch on a number of different concepts this morning, I think, but the notion of practicing management, or truly the kind of mens et manus approach to our educational initiatives here. Mens et manus is very alive and well at MIT. And not only does that offer an opportunity for great educational benefit for our student teams and the projects that they do, but they are indeed real-world projects that are making a difference in the world. And I think Anjali is going to give you some very inspiring examples of the work that folks are doing, and hopefully then tie it back to actually the educational frameworks that we think are making a difference in our students' experiences while they're here. So if Roberto Rigobon this morning was about gloom and doom, Anjali Sastry is all about hope for the future in a very positive way, although I think she's going to touch on some areas that are sad but hopefully improvable. By way of background, she's another twofer like Brad Feld was. She had her undergrad here in physics and Russian studies, I believe, and then came back for a PhD and finished up in the mid-90s in system dynamics, which is something that, again, I think she'll weave through her talk in different ways. A number of us have been talking about system dynamics throughout the morning already, an area that in some ways MIT and MIT folks really have pioneered back more than 50 years ago at this point, but is now being applied, exploited maybe even would be a good word, in solving or at least looking at solutions for a lot of the world's true challenges, something that MIT and those of us that work at MIT take very, very seriously. By way of other professional background, Anjali's been at Bain, so she's been, I would say, in the real world, and maybe even tending toward a real job, but some of our students would say, well, consulting doesn't quite count. So, but seriously, she's been working with a lot of private sector companies in that walk of life, has also spent some time at NGOs, and then has been back and forth here at MIT doing great, great things with our students. So please join me in welcoming Anjali Sastry.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. I got away with a really long title. I'm not sure why Leanne at all let me do it, but I'm going to talk about a notion that right now we're calling projects for change. And the idea I'm going to highlight today is an opportunity to get our students engaged in the process of bringing the best of what they're learning here at MIT Sloan, by way of tools, ideas, collaboration, learning by doing, and applying it to a particular challenge. And the one I'm going to highlight is global health delivery. And I'll explain why that's such a great arena to work in as we work our way through today's talk. And I've designed my talk to be pretty short, pretty focused, so that we have plenty of time for conversation. Because as you'll see by the time I get to the end of my slides, that's actually the point of it all. I'm really interested in this conversation at many levels. So, Dave talked about mens et manus. You guys remember what that means, right? What does it mean? Mind and hands. And this is the original seal from 1861. These guys have been, I guess, modernized since then. I'll show you the new picture. But I dug up the quote from William Barton Rogers, which I think actually is still really instructive. So I want to spend a minute actually considering it. So in case this is not your 140 whatever reunion, here's what he said in 1860. The interests of commerce and the arts, as well as general education, call for the most earnest cooperation of intelligent culture with industrial pursuits. So commerce, the real world, the arts, academia, general education. So it's the kind of drawing together research, real-world interests, and the education of our students. All three strands are important. And what those three strands call for now is this kind of earnest, hardworking, diligent application of both kind of the ways of thinking and analyzing and reflecting on the world with the industrial pursuits, the kind of real on-the-ground action. And that notion of earnest is actually one that resonates a lot with me. So, and I know I sometimes do get accused of being sort of earnest. You'll see a little bit of it today. But I want to spend some time thinking about what that earnest cooperation looks like today and what it could look like in the future. And as we consider that, we'll actually come back to some of the ideas that we heard at the end of Brad's discussion, because that may be part of the promise that new technology holds, as well as part of the promise that our new learning in the classroom opportunities hold. Oh, here's the new guys. Equally, I guess, unisex as the old ones. Anyway, so with Menz and Manus as our backdrop, one way to kind of think about the various ways in which we get our students, offer them the chance to combine Menz at Manus. We have a variety of learning experiences. Some of you, Dave tells me, some of you were MIT undergrads here too, so probably remember your formative roll up the sleeves, work in the lab experience. For me, it was that year-long physics hell called Junior Lab. We spent all the time in the lab for a whole year. Some of you probably did 270. Did you know that Chemi's Practice School, which is a real embedded kind of internship in which student teams work on real-world projects within industry, has been around for over 100 years? We have a long history. You know, 270, of course, that design competition that we have for MECI, has influenced education, undergraduate education throughout probably the planet, but it's certainly been an influence throughout MIT. And in the LFM program, we send students, as many of you may yourself remember, out into the real world to engage in 6-month-long internship projects that are substantive and that deliver real results and real change to the focal organizations. Here at Sloan, what form has this taken? Well, we've had classes in which students get real experiential learning. Some of you remember the beer game, perhaps? So we have in-class simulations. And more, we're looking to build our capability in classes that put students into real-world organizations, even if it's for a relatively brief period of time of 3 weeks, a month, something like that. And in so doing, we're really hoping that they take what they're learning in the classroom, try it out in the real world, reflect on it, come back, share what they're learning with us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that particular kind of cycle of learning. One useful framework comes from Kolb, who's a researcher on learning, but Kolb's cycle obviously owes a lot to Dewey. In fact, this is the whole kind of notion of learning by doing that's also embedded in the Deming cycle. And any of you who work in continuous improvement or process improvement will notice this is familiar too. But Kolb argues that we learn by kind of experiencing things, observing and thinking about them, forming constructs, concepts, or hypotheses that can then be tested and, of course, yield new experiences which are then fodder for analysis, right? This is a kind of basic learning loop. And we are working on, we have a variety of methods by which students kind of use this loop and exploit this loop. One question I have for you, though, that I'd love to think about is whether this loop, this learning loop that we think informs our course design and our class designs here, whether we could take it even further. Could we use this learning loop, for instance, as a tool for not only building each individual student's learning and insight, but as a tool for building shared learning and insight? Let me talk about that in a moment. So this model then holds the promise for helping our students to learn by doing in classes that they take, but could it also help us to do research? And when I give you the examples, this will become a little clearer, and then I think we'll have a really good conversation set up. And could we even exploit such a loop for making change happen in the world? So if we can help our students to build the skills that it takes to kind of be observant researchers by making sense, by noticing things that are happening in the world, to then form explicit hypotheses and theories that they're more aware of and more able to articulate and present and share, that they can then design their action steps in a smart and clever way, not merely to prove their hypotheses, but actually to test them. Come back into the classroom or into their companies or into their teams and say, guys, here's what I thought would happen, here's what did happen. Here's what I make of it. What do you think? Use that process to develop better ways of thinking about real-world problems, and then generate a conversation within a classroom, within a team, or within a company that might raise the level of debate, discourse, and discussion. And I'm here to argue that we've actually been doing a really great job of making this part of a traditional MBA curriculum and embedding this into our new vision of practicing management, in which we're putting it into more and more classes here at MIT Sloan. But I think there's promise, too, to actually use our students' experience as fodder for generating new insights into research. So, and I know that's very provocative, so I'm gonna talk to you about how I think that might happen. And maybe, bit by bit, we can actually make real needed changes happen in the world. So our learning model has a couple of key elements in it. First of all, students need to know the science. Why are you here at, here's a question I ask the students often. Why are you here at B school? Why do you come to business school? Why did you go to B school? Why? Yeah.
To learn.
To learn what, though?
To learn how to run a business better, to learn how to make better decisions, and to learn about, open your mind to other ideas, careers.
Yep.
To better understand the primary mechanism of change in a capitalist society so I could influence it.
Did you learn that?
Yeah, I understand more about the levers to pull than before, and I actually did the technology and policy program across the street as well, so I had both sides of that.
Good. So learning how things are done, learning by example of cases, so what has worked, what hasn't for others. Some students will say, well, you know, I could figure out how to do these things all myself, but I'm here to get, somebody else has already figured it out, right? So I'm here to get what they've already done. So I'm here just to sort of fast forward my thinking. Others will say, I'm here to learn how to think. I'm here to learn because on my own, raw experience is not necessarily going to lead me to the right conclusions. And we actually spend a bit of time here explaining why. Why is it that if you just accumulated more experience, you wouldn't necessarily get better at what you're doing? Why? Well, because we know that humans are prey to a variety of kind of very systematic and known challenges to their thinking, to their inferencing, to their decision making. And I'm going to show you a few of those in just a moment. So we sort of set the stage by saying raw experience or kind of naive intelligence will get you so far, but you may find yourself stuck in various traps. Let us tell you what some of those traps are. Then, so we kind of break them down, right? That's the beer game. You mess up no matter what. Then our next step is, okay, there's some hope. Yes, we're systematically flawed in our thinking, but luckily we have tools that can help you. Formal methods, informal methods, and more we're expanding that toolkit and making it extremely clear to the students what we have to offer. So yes, you can learn modeling techniques, you take DMD, but you can also learn how to tap into your own biases or how to run a better group decision-making session. I'll talk a bit about that in a sec. And then, of course, this learning is just learning about. Learning how to do it comes with practice. And here we become more and more aware about how much our students already practice within the classroom when we give them chances to do that, within workshops and other kind of non-formal learning experiences, and in particular, the amazing set of extracurricular experiences they engage in. And you might now reflect back on your own experiences. You learned some things in the classroom. You also figured out other things as you ran your club, worked on your projects, did stuff on the side. Nowadays, it's students who enter the 100K competition or many of the other competitions that exist. They're all kind of trying real time to apply some of the lessons they're learning and get some practice. And we know from the research on expertise, there's nothing like practice, right? I mean, again and again, I'm shocked when I read the studies that show that practice is probably the biggest differentiator between performance. Certainly, it's been shown in sports, music, chess. The studies on management are harder to do. But we think that there's a lot of evidence that the more you get to practice, the better you're going to be. You're going to be able to use more automatically some of the tools and techniques that make sense. You can develop more skill, insight, and expertise. And of course, that's one of the ideas behind doing in-class simulations and computer-based simulations. When you run the company by playing People Express, you can compress many years of experience, and in fact, many life cycles of a company like that, into a day or two by playing that simulator model again and again. So we're offering, that's one practice field. What are some of the other practice fields that we can offer students? And also, can we kind of make this process can we make it very visible and evident to everyone so they're actually appreciating this process? And in so doing, becoming a little more conscious and aware of the expertise and skill that they're building. So practice is key. But now, if we end the story here, I think we're sort of left at the level of building individual expertise. And if you look at our typical student who may really make the most of these amazing opportunities we offer them, you can come here, take a whole variety of classes, work with a startup here, do a business plan with some folks from across campus, go spend a month in Indonesia on a GLab class. You could have all of these experiences, and you could very well kind of ride this learning loop and build a lot of insight and actually hone your practice in this domain. But that insight may not be fed back into the classroom. It may not be visible to you, and it may not inform the world, including your faculty, unless there are excellent ways to share what you're learning. And that's one piece where I feel like we have a great opportunity. Can we get our students to spend more time reflecting on what they learn so that they can tell a better story? And is that, again, a skill that is important within organizations that are wrestling with change? If you can get your organizational members to kind of reflect on what you've learned. What are the lessons from that experience we just had? We just launched this product. What do we make of that? That skill of extracting the lesson that you've learned and sharing it is a really key one. Can you then bring people with different experiences into the room, juxtapose and contrast the inferences that they are drawing from their experience, so that you can begin to start building theories, rough though they may be, that could then be tested and built into your next round of action? And can you also then build towards a cumulative body of knowledge? And in domains like sustainability, I really feel like this is our only hope. There's not going to be a solution that comes from a bunch of profs sitting in a room and, cracking the problem of sustainability. The solutions are going to come from people trying things, going out there and putting them into practice, and then developing some skills of extracting their insight, testing it, probing it, and sharing it with others. Right now, we have rather impoverished methods of doing this. We have maybe the case method. Sometimes you'll hear a story or a case, but we don't really make the most of this piece of extracting lessons from experience. And in fact, if you think about the most powerful models for change, they're models of change where within an organization that's facing a major transition, pockets of new ideas bubble up, a few forward-thinking folks work on them, the leadership observes, realizes this is something that we can all build on, and then finds a way to pull out some generalizations about it, some lessons learned, and to reframe the already successful bits of activity as indicating a direction in which the organization could move. So this sort of incremental bubbling up model of change, I think, is a very promising one. To do it, though, of course, you need a set of skills that we're really interested in building within the students here, but it's something I want to hear how you work on in your organizations. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, I told you there are errors of judgment. This is just a few of them. So this is the break you down part of the learning process. We bring them in and say, guys, do you realize human beings are hardwired to mess up? And once you actually have at least a bit of a sense of the fundamental attribution error, it's going to take you quite far. Do you know what the fundamental attribution error is? It's the fact that when I screw up, I kind of know why I screw up. It's because, my husband didn't refilled my gas tank in the car, and now I had to stop for gas, and that's why I got in late, and I know my excuse, and it's all plausible, and I let myself off the hook. But when you show up late to a meeting, it's because you're inept, right? Or you don't care, you can't manage your time. So the fundamental attribution error is one of those self-serving biases that is pretty hardwired into our psyche. But if you become aware of it, you might realize that you're actually doing it. And you can teach yourself to catch yourself doing it. You can also embed processes into your team or into your meetings that might help you, that might serve as antidotes for this. For instance, we know that, so if we go to the sort of personal, interpersonal tools or techniques you could use, we know, I've been reading Dan Ariely's book. Have you guys taken a look at that? It's very readable. And in it, he talks, for instance, about what happens, a bunch of people sitting around a table at a bar ordering beer. And if everybody says their beer order out loud, the first few people are going to prime everyone else to order the same beer. And it may be that the later people making the orders, they don't choose the beer they most want because they're more influenced by whoever's spoken first. And you're going to get happier beer drinkers if you don't sequentially go around the table and hear everybody's beer order. If you wrote your order down without hearing the others, you'd be a happier beer drinker. Can we take that insight and use it within, can we teach students how to use it? Can we teach them how to catch themselves making an error or how to build a decision-making process that taps into this insight? Of course we can. And some of these are tools and techniques that already exist, right? So we can teach them, formal group decision-making techniques, online survey methods, et cetera, et cetera. And some of these might be more heuristic. Maybe you'll kind of evolve your own method that works for you. But kind of a conscious attention to how these tools, whether they're formal or less formal, whether they're structured or personal or interpersonal, how they help you kind of overcome some of those challenges to thinking, whether it's the biases, whether it's the kind of challenge of simulating a complex system in your brain. That's what we're about. I mean, that's a key piece of what we deliver here at MIT. And it's a key piece of what keeps faculty showing up. We're interested in our own challenges and limitations, and we love exploring them with students. So that's kind of a key driver in the kind of academic community here. But of course, as I mentioned, practice is something we're valuing more and more. And not only in looking at new classes, extracurricular activities, internships, G-Labs, and other experiences, but also just kind of realizing and valuing the idea that the more you do something, the better you get at it, and the more you can easily put it into practice, put it into your toolkit without even having to consciously invoke it. So you kind of decrease the load of using it. But now to that last piece of reflecting, juxtaposing, and building shared knowledge. Here, the skills involved include the ability to actually extract insight from experience. And here we've been pioneering some new methods that I'm really excited about. Some methods include getting students to blog every week by making a prediction. So if students are working on a project, I have them every week make a written prediction of what's going to happen in some domain of their project. Because that prediction's written and time-stamped, this is the beauty of blogs, and the next post is right after it, the student can look back and say, wow, I predicted last week that we'd be able to do a focus group, and that the focus group research would show that our design concept was in line with what people wanted. And in fact, my prediction was completely wrong. We couldn't even line up enough people to do this. And when they came, they had no idea what we were talking about. Whatever the kind of prediction and then outcome is, that's a great fodder for learning. And we can exploit then some of the techniques that emerge from the military. This has echoes of the after-action review, a practice that's been developed in the military and used elsewhere. And of course, it's a technique that engineers are well used to in the form of kind of prototyping, testing, and rapidly iterating on a design. So we're using tools like that to get students more aware that when you take action, you're actually often acting on an assumption or a hypothesis. If you make that more explicit, the result that you get back will then shed light on that hypothesis or assumption. And of course, that underscores many of the talking about consulting, it underscores the McKinsey method is all about hypothesis-based case methods. So it's kind of core to social science, but it's actually core to engineering and core to management consulting and good management. So I think we need to kind of elevate that and make that part of the MIT Sloan method. So given that kind of framing of the approach and the technique, I want to spend a few minutes talking about one particular domain. And I'm going to use slides that I borrowed from a colleague. Now, this is a domain that is extremely challenging. The story is as follows. In the arena of global health, we know that we have the methods to improve healthcare for everybody on this planet. We know that we could substantially reduce the death rate and substantially improve healthcare with the tools and medicines that we already have. Yet it's not happening. And don't say there's not enough money. Maybe we need more, but there is a boatload of money going into global health. I actually have some of the stats right here. So let me show you some of the results that come from a colleague at Harvard. This is Dr. Jim Kim slides. And Jim is one of the two founders of Partners in Health, which is an organization that's worked throughout the world, including in Haiti. This is Jim's quick reflections on his work in Peru. So Jim says, MDR, which is multi-drug resistant TB, used to be a death sentence. In the mid-90s, the WHO said, you know what? Where people with MDR-TB usually die, and it's not worth looking to treat people with MDR-TB because that money should be better spent on prevention or on other public health methods. This seemed very plausible. People said, you know, look at how much it costs to treat MDR-TB. You know, for that same money, you could get more bang for your buck doing other things. Right? A plausible argument. But it was attacked on several grounds, including, of course, moral grounds, as well as the grounds that this is an assumption you're making that actually has never been tested. And many of the reasons behind this, such as the poorest of the poor are very poor in adherence to complex drug regimens, were mere assertions that were never tested. What Jim was able to do is go into a poor community in Peru, work on a project within this area to figure out if they could deliver MDR-TB care at a lower cost, figured out that part of the problem was that the drugs were very expensive. Could he somehow make a better market here? Turns out he could. He eventually took a post at the WHO, and in just a few years, by smart bargaining, negotiating, and using resources to guarantee volume on forward contracts for drug production, drove down the price by 2 orders of magnitude for some of these drugs. 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. There's a similar story for HIV/AIDS meds, in which the Clinton Foundation plays a similar brokering role. So these folks were amazing at driving down the price of drugs and then scaling up the scale at which people were treated. And eventually were able to kind of understand that now driving the price of meds down was an important part of the story, and they could now show that it was worthwhile treating folks for HIV/AIDS or for MDR-TB, but that was not enough. Hence this particular model, which they're calling the 4 pillars model. They realize they need a more integrated view of healthcare than just deliver. If a patient's malnourished, you can get them all the HIV/AIDS meds you want. They can't even absorb them if they're malnourished. One needs to provide food. And then as this thinking expands, enter the system dynamicist, because I become very interested in how these pieces are connected. This gives us a chance to start looking at and thinking about how you would deliver primary care in a way that made sense, given that there's a huge inflow of funding into HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria treatment in particular. Can this be the starting point for redesigning a healthcare system? Well, of course it could be. But it turns out that folks need to figure out how to scale up, how to improve processes on the ground in clinics, how to improve logistics, how to reduce complexity when it comes to the variety of medicines that are involved, how to manage inventories, how to design a strategy for training and retaining a workforce, how to design who does which tasks, because there are not RNs on the ground in Africa. So some of these challenges are so perfectly matched to the things that we're working on here in our classes and in our research. So that seems to me like a great opportunity. And indeed, so this is their example from Rwanda of a successful program delivered at about $25 per capita. In the US, healthcare is actually even more now, over $6,000 per capita. They're arguing for pretty equal levels of care. So this could be a provocative model that one could actually work on in an emerging or a developing economy and figure out what are the lessons learned for elsewhere. I'm going to skip. Oh, I want to just show you this previous slide because it gives you a sense of how much money is flowing into this particular domain. With PEPFAR alone, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS, putting $50 billion on the table for the next 5 years. Okay, these are huge amounts of funding that are flowing into this domain with not much insight into management and into the techniques that I think could really help. There's also a little comparative study. 2 organizations on the ground in Uganda are both getting PEPFAR funding but have wildly different approaches. One of these has kind of puts on dramas and a singing troupe. The other one is a bunch of docs sitting in a room writing prescriptions. They're both getting funding and they both look to be effective. They have different measures and nobody's mapped out a causal model or spent time kind of drawing the inferences for each program of what works, what doesn't, and why. So there's a need to figure out both how we can how we can improve the performance of an individual clinic, program, or operation, and then also what are the more general challenges. So here's where we have one opportunity. The new course that I'm going to run next year is going to partner our students with clinics on the ground in Africa. And we're going to look for projects that sort of fall into any of these buckets. And we already have a variety of clinics that have approached us. And we are looking to work in true MIT fashion. We don't want policy stuff. We don't want to do kind of big picture analysis. We want to go in there and do an operational improvement. So we're going to send the students we're going to set them up in the fall. I actually have an outline of the course. We're going to set them up in the fall, then send them to work on the ground for 3 to 4 weeks in Africa in January, and then have them come back and spend another 6 weeks with us, figuring out what they've learned and what that means. And this is the piece that I wanted to spend my last few minutes discussing with you, because I see the challenge here, and I actually think it's a challenge that you might have in your own organizations. We're investing so much effort in these projects. The cost in terms of money, the time of everybody engaged, the carbon footprint. These projects are costly projects. I think they're going to be great. The students are going to learn a ton. And we're designing the whole thing to deliver real improvements for the partner organizations in Africa. But what else can we make of this? How else can we extract lessons learned and get people to share their insights about the small problems and how they relate to the big problems? Can we have these conversations in a classroom, in a facilitated discussion? I think so. Are there other ways to build a community conversation about insights that are emerging and how the pieces might fit together? I went to the WHO last week. I've only been working on this area for a little bit, and even then, there's a huge amount of interest in hearing what these perspectives might offer folks at the highest level within, say, the WHO, because there's a real acknowledgement that we don't know what works, and we don't know how to even have a conversation about what works. So here, we're thinking that some of the methods we use with our students in terms of getting them to map out a causal theory of how the steps they take and the improvements they make are improving healthcare delivery. If we could take some of the insights from system dynamics and some of the mapping and modeling techniques that you probably worked on here when you were at school, we can take some of those and use them to start generating lessons learned. Could we then start to generate a conversation about what works and what doesn't? I don't know. I hope so. So I wanted to leave you with the questions then about how you learn from experience when you're operating in a complex system. From test cases, from field experience, from specific projects. I think this is the key challenge of sustainability. And researchers can add something, of course, but I think there needs to be conversation with practitioners too. And I think that some of you may be thinking about exactly these questions right now. And I'd love to hear what you have to say and what methods work for you. Because eventually, maybe we could serve as a hub for a new kind of conversation. You know, the new version of the City on the Hill is not we're the place with the wisdom and knowledge that's being dispensed everywhere. It's that we're a facilitator of a conversation about really challenging and really complex changes that we're seeing happen or that need to happen. And that we could nurture the learning and put at this central point some of the very kind of unique skills, tools, and approaches that MIT has to offer in helping to address these problems. So what do you think? I want to hear. Yeah.
How are you using the word sustainability here?
We're consciously very open about the definition of sustainability, including thinking about personal sustainability. And in fact, that's an issue for many of these operations, say, run by, say, Partners in Health. These doctors and workers are often kind of killing themselves to get this work done. So there's everything from personal sustainability to issues about how workers are treated and participate in the process. We think that's an important piece of sustainability. So we've been pretty Catholic, pretty open in kind of allowing for different definitions of sustainability, and more want to encourage that dialogue. And that's why I think health is a really important part of it. I think that obviously we've got to tackle global warming and carbon emissions, but we also need to tackle poverty. And I think there's a real recognition of that. Yep.
Well, I detect a little bit of the approach of a consultant in terms of a very robust approach to understanding a problem. But then once you get there, I think a lot of the people in this room are going to want to go beyond that to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I'm talking about specifically is recognizing that a lot of the things that you've touched on, whether it's MDR-TB relating to how treatment has been dispensed for many years, or AIDS and cultural practices, is that what you get down to is beliefs and belief systems, whether it's in an organization and how that organization is run, or a society. So the real challenge is getting at the belief system. And I'm reading a book now by Howard Gardner, Changing Minds. I don't know if he's got any answers in that, but it's the changing of the minds that I think the people here ultimately are going to have to wrestle with.
Yeah, and in fact, when you talk to experienced practitioners in this area, they will say that sort of even the first step of just having a culture of hope, of belief that you can make a difference, you can make a change that's going to improve things, that's often the very first challenge that needs to be tackled. My antidote, I have several thoughts on that front. One is, yes, so mapping the beliefs is actually part of this toolkit. Students need to be able to map their own beliefs. I'm engaging in this work because I believe that taking step X will create step Y, right? That's one level of beliefs. But they also need to be able to work with stakeholders and get skilled at inferring their beliefs and making that a little bit explicit in whatever conversation is appropriate in that setting. But another piece that I think is really important is the value of one experience. If we can have one project that tackles a real need, a point of pain for one of the community partners, and that project is a success and demonstrates that change is possible and helps show some of the methods for doing that, and if we can document it and tell a compelling story that says, believe it or not, often we're going to add a lot of value with smart form design. Designing information forms that people fill out in clinics and figuring out ways to get the right form to the right place is going to save days. It's going to save lives. If we can document this story and talk about how the students collaborated with the stakeholders, design that form, the impact it had, and if we can gather data that shows that, I think we then have a kind of a nugget on which we can then build the longer process and the bigger process of changing beliefs. I acknowledge that's a huge issue. Back there in the yellow.
Well, no doubt that you have a very interesting project in front of you, but you may want to assess the effect on demographics and the experience of other countries that have done exactly what you're proposing. And let me just bring a brief example with my own country, Mexico, in the 60s. We thought that we were very intelligent and were able to put together small groups of doctors that were to the countryside and to vaccinate. So we were able, with a handful of doctors, vaccinate thousands or hundreds or tens of thousands of people. And we were very, very much successful in stop infant mortality to a very large rate. What we created was an economic disaster because we created poverty, we created the state was not able to have enough funds to fund the more number of students that so those students have to get out of the countryside, migrate to the cities. So
good. So what he's talking about
So on,
here
so on.
is a fundamental challenge of improving the quality of life. And it's part of the story of the demographic transition. In every demographic transition, one brings down the death rate first. So you get longer life expectancy first. Birth rates usually shift later. So you get a bulge in population that can actually tip your whole system. It might be health system, it might be educational system, into a worse performing mode. It's a serious challenge. And again, if you may even remember, we do this in the system dynamics class. We do the simulations. You get a chance to see how long that transition takes, determines that bulge, and has a long-lasting effect on demographics within the country. We recognize that. That's one reason why there needs to be a more integrated model of primary care that includes all elements of delivering better health, that includes reproductive health and control of reproduction. So there's a huge issue at play here. Again, it's another kind of systems issue for sure. And also, it becomes very important to think of the intervention as a vehicle and tool as part of an education process and part of a two-way dialogue between community and the folks who are helping them out. So, but I acknowledge it's a real challenge. Okay.
I guess
right
it's
there.
working.
Yep.
Just a suggestion to save time.
Yeah.
If you could model as it's operating right now, before your students go out there, they can waste a lot of time trying to figure that out. As much as you can let them know how it works now,
Yes,
I think you'll get better results.
Yeah.
They could waste 4 weeks trying to figure out how this thing works.
I know.
Because they've never been in it before, maybe.
know.
But I think that is so important.
Yeah.
If you can get it documented and they'll read it
Yep.
and look to it, and then
Yep.
they can move faster.
Yeah. So
That's just a suggestion.
No, it's a great
And
suggestion.
it's my experience.
Yes, what we've done, I think you may even know, last year we sent, 166 students took this class, GLAB. I'm just talking about GLAB, there are other classes too. But in GLAB, we sent 166 of our students to emerging markets to work with entrepreneurial organizations. And they had to get on the ground and start working fast. So we have a bit of experience there. But it's one thing to work with an entrepreneurial organization who has the wherewithal to contact MIT Sloan and actually to fund the travel, because that's one of the criteria in GLAB. In this case, now we're moving into a new domain. Our partners are not paying, we're seeking them. We're now finding a kind of new opportunity to work with them, but not necessarily with the language of business as our lingua franca. And indeed, we're going to have to wrestle with the translation and getting to understand the system at a much broader level. What I'm doing right now is sending students, right this summer actually, I've rustled up a tiny bit of money to send some of the students out to some of the sites right now. Want to start documenting what it looks like. Want to do this project scoping face-to-face, because I understand how important that is. Want to start gathering information. I actually called up YouTube, thinking that maybe they would help me figure out ways in which our students and others could generate small, short videos to share with each other about what they're observing and about what they currently know. So I've been interviewing graduating students who have worked in Africa and getting little clips of them talking about what it's like to set up a meeting, what are the challenges with getting a bus, like even stuff like that, so that we can start to share these little bits of information. Again, we already have students doing some of this, and we're going to send more, and I want to make sure we get the most knowledge from them. So I think it's an excellent, and I'd love more ideas on how we can kind of share that learning and fast forward the process so that each experience builds on the past instead of recreating a long learning journey. Sastry@mit.edu. And I also brought with me some brochures for the class to give you, if you'd like to look at it and learn a little more about it. And I still would love organizations. So if you know an organization that might want to partner, I even have paperwork for that. So you can come and get a letter or a form from me. But it's sastry@mit.edu.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
Here you go.
Thank you. Thank you.